Go back. Hello. So now we have to discuss about the population growth. Okay, so one second. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Next, we have to talk about the population growth. Now, when it comes to population growth, how does a population increase? Very simple, right? So, for a population to increase, there are four parameters. So that happens in every population. Based on these parameters, the population either increases or decreases. Simple. So now what are these factors? Some of the factors are called as, okay, these four factors are natality, mortality, immigration, emigration. Now, why do organisms do this? Whether it is natality, mortality, immigration, or emigration. So basically, it depends on the factors like food availability, predation, pressure, weather, etc. Okay, based on that, these organisms, get into these things, and then their population will change. What are the most common things? First one is natality. What is natality? Natality is the number of births. Okay, so number of births per individual in a particular area, that is called as natality. Okay, in a particular area is called as natality. Mortality is death. What's the total amount of deaths in a population in a given time? Okay, in a particular place. So that is called as mortality. Next one is immigration. Immigration means what? Immigration is means people actually going, right? So this is go. Oh, okay, coming. This is coming, and emigration is going. Okay, so this is what happens. So usually now, whenever you have more of natality, that is more of birth, and then you have more immigration, then you have more increase in population. If you have more deaths and more people leaving your place, then you have less population. So that is how the population fluctuates based on these four parameters. Okay. So what are those? One is natality, that is the birth; mortality, that is the death; immigration, that is people who are coming from different regions; and emigration is people who want to go from this place to another place. Okay, so now, yes, okay, so now you can see the representation. What happens in immigration? The population density increases. What happens in natality? The births increases, that leads to increase in population density. Then mortality, the deaths increases, that leads to decrease in population density. Similarly, emigration, what will happen? People leaving your hometown, that will lead to a decrease in population density. So in simple terms, okay, if if we determine this, if you put this in an equation, if n is the population density in a given time t, okay, in that time you have the certain population density, then if you take a t plus 1 from this time to another time, so if you take t plus 1, now your population density, n t plus 1 is equals to nt plus birth plus 1 minus death plus e. Okay, this is actually immigration, birth plus I minus death plus immigration. So that is called as, that is the equation that we can derive for population density. Okay, as I told you, there are two factors. One is natality, other one is immigration. If these two increases, population density increases. If these two increases, population density decreases. Simple. Okay, next one. Let's talk about population growth. How can a population grow? So there are conditions and there are factors which determine whether the population will increase or decrease, correct, right? So for any given species, it is always a beginning stage. So let us take that if a population has to grow, then we need certain parameters that it has to fulfill. First one, an organism requires sufficient amount of food. An organism requires very nice shelter. An organism requires proper climatic conditions, which are very stable throughout the year. An organism do not need competitors, which is competing for its food, or it is competing for mating, or it is competing for any other resources. Our next one is disease. So if these conditions are not there, then this organism is in a very stable place where it can increase its numbers. Correct, right? So as I told you, increase in number happens because of births or happens because of immigration. And deaths and emigration leads to a decrease in population. Now, when we talk about births, births are very, very common. Immigration and emigration have very important, it requires very important and very unique conditions, okay, for this to happen. For example, change in the climate or harsh weather conditions, competition in certain, certain regions, etc. That can lead to the change in population growth. Understood? Now, when it comes to the understanding of growth model, how an organism can grow, okay, as I told you, let us imagine if an organism is given everything like unlimited resources with respect to food, with respect to no competition, everything is perfect. So if that happens, what it leads to, in the initial stage, an organism tries to adapt to that environment. So once it is done, it has everything that it is requiring, and there is no competition and nobody to stop it. Now one becomes two, two becomes four, four becomes eight, eight becomes 16, 16 becomes 32, 32 becomes 64, and it exponents. So this rate at which, okay, it doubles every time, this is called as exponential growth. So exponential growth, if you represent it against the time and the population density that is increasing with respect to it, you will get a J-shaped curve. So the J-shaped curve is obtained in an exponential growth. In any of the exponential graph, you get J-shaped curve. So what does a J-shaped curve determine? You can tell that you can just give an equation for an exponential curve, that is the J curve, that is dn by dt is equals to Rn. So let's say how we get that. Now we are plotting the population density against time. Now, if we try to give an equation to it, we know that the population size that we represent it in the form of n. Okay, we represent population size in n. Next one, birth rate is number of births, that is small b. Death rate is small d. Okay, then increase or decrease. Okay, when we talk about population increase or decrease with respect to n in a given time, okay, in a given time period, t can be represented as dn by dt. So now dn by dt, that is change in the population with respect to a given time, is equals to birth minus death into n. Okay, that is the population density at that time. Now let birth minus death is equals to r. R is a very, very important factor. Okay, we'll talk about this factor. Then if we convert this d minus, that is birth minus death into R, then it becomes dn by dt is equals to Rn. So this is the equation for exponential growth, and you have to remember this. That's it. Okay, what represents what. Now the R, what I told you, is a very important factor. What is this important factor? This is called as intrinsic rate of natural increase. Intrinsic rate of natural increase shows us how the our population has increased or decreased with respect to given time. Okay, so and for example, we can plot this R value on different parameters. For example, what is the population in this year at this temperature, and next year at this temperature, and next year at this temperature. Now we took temperature and we understood how the R value is changing for a particular population. Similarly, for anything, you can take for competition of food resources, migration, or because of climatic conditions, any of these factors, hundreds of parameters you can take, and you can understand the rise or decrease in the population, in the population uh, because of that particular reason. Like for example, whether you're plotting for temperature, whether you're plotting for competition, anything, so that will give you a change how it is affecting the rate or the change in the population. Oh, understood? So that is why R is very important factor. Okay. Now, if you talk about the integral form of the same exponential equation, right? If you integrate it, so what do you get? dn by dt, you get nt is equals to n naught ert, where nt, as I told you, is the population density at the time t. whatever the time we're considering. Next one, n naught is the population at time zero. So we have to start at one point and then we go. Next one is r is the intrinsic rate of natural increase. I told you what we get through r. Next one is e. So that is the base of natural logarithmic, that is 2.71828. So thus we, if we do it, we get the curve for the exponential growth. And this curve is never happening in the nature. Why it is never happening in the nature? Because people, there is nowhere on the planet where there is unlimited resources and you are the king and there is nobody to object it. It's never happens, right? So there is always said, okay, if let us say that we have a place in the earth that this organism has no competition, it has unlimited resources, it has resources, and then it is surviving. Now, ultimately, even this organism has to face its end. You know why? Because our Earth is not like magic. It's not like she keeps on giving. Even she gets exhausted at one point. So this capacity is called as carrying capacity of the Earth. So our carrying capacity of the Earth will decline gradually, and eventually there is no more left to give by the Earth. So at that point, the population will not have anything to feed on, or it will not have shelter. It does not have any of the resources that determines its life. Okay, so that is when you have your organism facing this issue. So that is why cannot have an exponential, like undisturbed growth rate. It's not possible in the natural environment. That is why we have logistic growth. What is logistic growth? Since no population is going to experience this lavishness, our nature has limited resources and it has a lot of competition and it has a lot of individuals fighting for the same resources, etc. So that is why what happens, an individual, for it to survive and then for it to reproduce, it has to undergo this logistic growth. So if we observe, okay, if we observe a logistic growth curve, what we can see is in the initial stage, a logistic growth, an organism takes a lot of time for adapting. And as its adaptation has peaked, now it increases its population very fastly. And then at one point, the population saturates and it will never increase again. Okay. So this curve is called a sigmoid curve or an S curve that is obtained in the logistic curve. Okay, now what happens? This can be divided into three phases. One, we have a lag phase, log phase, and exponential phase. We have a lag phase where the organism population is very, very less and they're taking time to adapt and evolve. And after this is done, there is a sudden increase in the number. So that is a log phase, and then it goes to exponential phase. And then finally, we have saturation phase. So in saturation phase, we don't have any increase. So it remains stable. So this logistic growth curve can be given as dn by dt is equals to rn into k minus n by k. Now here we have come across with a new term that is k. Okay. So what happens? As I told you, in our nature, for any organism, that is, there is always a limit. And we call this limit where our earth cannot give anymore as the carrying capacity of earth, and we determine it by k. Understood? So these limited resources can actually lead to this particular curve. So what does this curve says? Okay, now n is the population density at time t, r is the intrinsic rate of natural increase, k is the carrying capacity of the planet. Okay, so now what happens? This particular equation, that is dn by dt, that is growth at that time with respect to time, is equals to r, that is rate of change in the intrinsic value, and n, you know that the population density at that time. Next one, k is the carrying capacity minus population density divided by k. If you do that, you will understand what is the proper r value, okay, for that particular species. Now, getting this r value, you can understand if the population is increasing or decreasing, and it is a very realistic growth curve, okay, compared to any of the exponential curve, because it's practical, okay, practicals, and this acceleration and deacceleration happens, okay, because of the environmental conditions, and we can analyze that, and this with respect to all the climatic conditions, biotic or abiotic factors that is influencing. We can consider all of this and we can establish this logistic growth curve. Understood? So that is why this type of population growth is also called as Van Herst-Pearl logistic growth curve, and it is a realistic module for how the organism's population increases. Understood? Yeah, that's it. Are you guys following? Okay. So next one is life history of variation. Now, if we talk about variation, we know that a population is something which has a similar characteristics, and they have these species, right? And they share the similar genetics. Now, when we talk about variation, variation is very closely related to that of reproduction. So whenever we have a population that has evolved to maximum reproductive fitness or Darwinian fitness, where we have very high R value, you know that higher the R value, higher is the population matrix. That means they're increasing. Understood? Now what happens is, under any selection pressures, these organisms, what happens is they change their reproductive strategies. So whenever they change their reproductive strategies, okay, it completely different. For example, if you take an example of a Pacific salmon fish, they reproduce only once in a lifetime. Whereas if you take any of the birds, okay, twice in a lifetime or many times in a year, okay, etc. So because of the life history of organism and how they have evolved for reproduction based on the biotic and abiotic components, okay, their variation and their population depends. It's not that all organisms have to reproduce at a very faster pace, okay, or very slow pace. It depends, okay. So that is how the Darwinian variation has led to the population index that we can observe. Understood? So it's very simple to understand this concept. Any organism who have gone through these Darwinian changes, what happens is either they have the capacity, either they have the requirement to reproduce spontaneously or reproduce once in a lifetime or once in a year, etc., based on the circumstances that they have been put because of the biotic or abiotic factors. Understood? Now, uh, another important factor that influences the population, okay, in an ecological system, in an ecosystem, is population interactions. So whenever we have an organism, I told you that organisms are not independent and they're constantly interacting with each other for one or the other reasons. So these constant interactions have been established as a thumb mark for it to happen without any exceptions. It's a compulsion that it has to happen. There is no doubt about it. Why it is compelled and why these interactions has to happen? As I've told you that even the trees which you feel that okay they are lifeless or they have life and they don't interact much, they are just stable and they don't react, they're okay. Even if you think like that, it's not the same. What you see is not what you can believe. Now even the trees, they have this interaction that is happening. Now these trees are interacting in such a way that in a very strange way they are giving you everything, right? You're eating the the grains, you're eating the seeds, and you're eating the plants, okay, for food as a herbivore. Now, when you die, basically you become a manure, and again the plant extracts from you all the minerals that is present in the soil as a result of your death, and then it builds its own tissues and own plant parts, okay, for its survival. Now, this happened just by looking at it, you can see that they are literally grazing us or farming us for their food. So this is one kind of an interaction that you can see. Similarly, all the other organisms in this nature interact, and this interaction is must for the flow of this energy. There has to be a flow, and there has to be dependency and interdependency. And this pattern of how an organism interacts with another organism can be divided into these different types of interactions. So what an organism can interact as? Either it can be mutualism, it can be competition, it can be predation, it can be parasitism, it can be commensalism, or it can be amensalism. Now, what are these? These are the ways in which two different species can interact, as I told you. So we have the definition for that. What is mutualism? Now, when two species are interacting, and if both the species are benefited, that is called as mutualism. What is competition? If you have two species, one species is dominant and other species is recessive, you know that the dominant species wins over a recessive species, and this happened because of the interest for one same resource or one common thing. So because of that, there was competition, and one was saved and one was harmed. Okay. No, sorry. In competition, what happens? Both of the species are harmed. Understood? In competition. Next one is predation. In predation, what happens is you cannot just call predators as, okay, lion is a predator. Yes, it is a predator. Tiger is a predator. Yes, it is a predator. Is deer a predator? Yes, it is a predator. Even though it is a herbivore, it is depending upon the plant life. Okay, and it has to prey on the plant life. So even that is a predator. So anyway, whenever you talk about this predation interactions, one is benefited, obviously the one who eats, and the one is harmed, the one who becomes the food. So that is the prey and predation. Okay. Next one is parasitism. You know that the parasitism is very, very not convenient thing in the environment. Why? Because you know that the parasite is always benefited. Along with being benefited, it harms its host. So that is called as parasitism. You know that many diseases are there with respect to parasitism. Commensalism. What happens in commensalism? One is benefited and other is harmed. Okay. And in amensalism, one is benefited and the other one is unaffected. Okay. So that is called as the population interactions, and those are the different types of interactions. Sorry. Those are the types of interactions we have in our environment. Excuse me. Sorry. Okay. All right, students, we are left with only 4 minutes, and we'll take it up in the next class. All right, is it fine? The last part of it, and then we have one minute, one more, two more lessons to go. We can finish the portion. Can you stop?